Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. The fact that the criminal section of the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, the very unit tasked with investigating killings by police, refused to investigate the deadly shooting by a federal agent of a woman in Minneapolis last week is so shocking that it has led to the largest mass resignation inside the Department of Justice in months. Our colleagues, Kara Lennick and Ken Delanium, were first to report this, quote, top leaders of the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division have left their jobs to register their frustration with the department after the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, decided not to investigate the ICE officer's fatal shooting of Renee Good last week. When asked for comment, a DOJ official, quote, did not dispute the departures, but said the officials have requested early retirement prior to the Minnesota shooting. For years, the criminal section of the Civil Rights Unit has prosecuted major cases of police brutality, cases like the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. According to the section's own website, the ultimate goal of their work in every case is to, quote, ensure that allegations are thoroughly and fairly investigated, that acts constituting federal criminal civil rights violations are sufficiently remedied, and that the rights of the victims are vindicated. But now, what the department is choosing to investigate is whether or not Renee Nicole Good had any ties to activist groups. According to the New York Times, quote, the decision by the FBI and Justice Department to scrutinize Ms. Good's activities and her potential connections to local activists is in line with the White House strategy of deflecting blame for the shooting away from federal law enforcement and toward opponents they have described as domestic terrorists, often without providing evidence. The handling of the investigation is also reportedly leading to turmoil inside the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota. From the New York Times reporting, quote, 6 federal prosecutors in Minnesota resigned Tuesday over the Justice Department's push to investigate the widow of a woman killed by an ICE agent and the department's reluctance to investigate the shooter. That is according to people with knowledge of their decisions. Joseph H. Thompson, who was second in command at the U.S. Attorney's Office, was among those who quit Tuesday, according to 3 people with knowledge of that decision. New York Times adding that Thompson rejected the idea of investigating Renee Nicole Good's widow, as well as, quote, the Justice Department's refusal to include state officials in investigating whether the shooting itself was lawful. People familiar with his decision say. Turmoil at the Justice Department in the wake of the shooting death of Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. MS Now senior investigative reporter who is bylined on that reporting that we led from at the DOJ. Kara Lennick is back with us. She's also the author of the book Injustice, How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department. Also joining us, former Assistant Special Agent in Charge at the FBI and MS Now National Security and Intelligence Analyst Michael Feinberg's back. He's also a fellow at Lawfare and former top official at the DOJ. Legal analyst Andrew Weissman is back with us as well. Kara Lennick, take us through your reporting first, please.
Well, we thought it was pretty urgent last night at 10 o'clock when we learned and then confirmed that at least 4, and possibly now we've confirmed 6 as of this afternoon, senior leaders of the Civil Rights Division unit that handles this kind of investigation were resigning, partially in protest of how the department decided not to investigate the fatal shooting by an ICE officer of Renee Good. You know, you set it up perfectly when you described it, Nicole, as this is the unit that historically has always investigated these, not because there's a conclusion that an officer improperly drew his weapon or her weapon, but because there must be a fair investigation when an American citizen or civilian is killed by a federal officer. There is a belief, and there has been a belief in the Justice Department until now, that it's important for fairness and trust in the department that these investigations happen. We've also confirmed that good reporting by the Times that 6 federal prosecutors with the Department of Justice in the Minneapolis-based office of the U.S. Attorney's Office have resigned, furious that there would be no investigation of that shooting. There would be no allowing the local authorities to participate. And instead, there would be an emphasis on investigating Good and her widow. I guess what's most important for readers and viewers of this show to take away is that the sources who came to us to tell us about this are trying to send an alarm bell. They're trying to send a signal that what's happening in the Justice Department is not copacetic. This decision not to investigate the death of an American at the hands of an ICE officer is beyond the pale for a lot of these officials. They did register, by the way, the civil division folks who resigned, these leaders, they did register their concern that they were considering leaving before the shooting. But after the shooting, after the decision by their bosses not to investigate it, they all concluded they would leave immediately.
Carol, let me just make sure. So it's 12 prosecutors are out, have resigned over the Justice Department's handling. Let me ask you a dumb question. Isn't it bad for the ICE agent that he doesn't want the imprimatur of a thorough review of his conduct to clear him?
Well, I mean, it's not a dumb question at all, by the way, but it does presume that the officer acted as the standard requires, which is you only use lethal, deadly force when you have a reasonable belief that your life is in danger. And there's a serious question based on the video evidence about whether or not the officer actually thought his life was in danger. This was an officer who had a gun drawn, a wheel turned away from that individual. He shot her through the front windshield, but the corner of the windshield because he was at a corner from her. And he also had a phone in his hand because he had been filming the sort of events around that day, protesters of ICE officers in Minnesota's streets. And so it's a question that's reasonably raised. Did he have a reasonable basis to think his life was in danger if he shot her as she was turned away from him and if he had a phone in his hand?
Michael Feinberg, I guess it's a dumb question because, of course, they don't think an investigation would be good for this officer, or they would have one. I mean, as much as the Trump story rumbles and roars on like a freight train, there are some things that don't ever change. The worst thing in the world for ICE right now is for DOJ to not investigate the conduct of the officer. The worst thing in the world for Donald Trump is for ICE to be more unpopular than it is right now, dividing not just America, but his own coalition. The worst thing in the world for Stephen Miller is for more people inside Trump's coalition to think that he's out of control and dragging Donald Trump's popularity into the toilet bowl with the out-of-control conduct of ICE. And the worst thing for the Department of Justice, already on the ropes politically because of their laughable handling of the Epstein case, just ask Susie Wiles in her 11 on-the-record interviews, is for DOJ to look like they're in on this political debacle and a cover-up of an ICE agent. I mean, what is amazing is that the facts and the things that happen before our eyes are obviously the same facts and things that happen before the very eyes of Harmeet Dillon and other decision makers at DOJ.
Yeah, so look, first of all, this is a very short-sighted decision by people at the Justice Department who think they are actually helping Officer Ross. Because the fact is, if our Constitution and country function like they're supposed to, at some point this administration is going to end. But what is not going to end with it is the state statute of limitations for murder or manslaughter or whatever crime they may choose to charge Ross with in the future. And a thorough DOJ investigation, if it did in fact exonerate him, would go a very long way to creating at least an informal presumption of his relative innocence, if that were to be the case. But look, this is all of a piece of what we know about how the Trump administration operates. They shade the law and they obfuscate when their perceived allies are in trouble with prosecutors or with law enforcement. We saw it in the first term with the way Bill Barr horribly mischaracterized and underplayed the conclusions of Robert Mueller's final report, which Andrew worked on. We saw it during the campaign for the 2024 election when he promised to pardon thousands of people who committed an act of domestic terrorism and assaults on federal officers. Those pardons did, in fact, happen. We have seen it with an investigation into Tom Homan evaporating into thin air. And now we're seeing it with a refusal to even consider the possibility that Officer Ross and his colleagues may have been outside policy.